In any great social change moment, there are those people who rise up in our memories, those people who stand out, who we remember. If I asked you now, for example, to think of leaders of the civil rights movement, you would probably have several great leaders that spring to mind. Perhaps for you, it's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or maybe Malcolm X, or John Lewis, Rosa Parks. The same would be true of other movements for change as well. But these leaders, while great, impactful, visionaries, did not act alone. The myth of the lone hero is one of the most persistent stories in our culture. It is the idea that a single exceptional individual changes history through courage, brilliance, or moral clarity. The myth is often framed as if their impact emerged in isolation. The lone hero myth can lead us to believe that change depends on extraordinary individuals. We are left searching and waiting for such a person to emerge. In contrast to the lone hero myth is the movement ecology, which suggests that everyone embedded in a network can influence outcomes. This influence comes through relationships, roles, and contributions that may seem small, but are structurally significant. Instead of searching for a charismatic leader, movement ecology encourages us to invest in connections, resilience, and diversity within a system, because that's where transformative capacity actually resides. Movement ecology directly relates to our shared Unitarian Universalist value of interdependence. We often think of this value as it relates to the earth and the natural world, and that is a big part of it. However, in the statements that are printed on the back of your order of service each week, it also states that we will create and nurture sustainable relationships of care and respect, mutuality, and justice. The Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker is an American theologian, author, and former president of the Starr King School for the Ministry, one of the 2 Unitarian Universalist identity seminaries in the U.S. She was the first woman to serve as a permanent head of an accredited U.S. theological school, and was a pioneer in the reconciling congregation movement, affirming the sacred worth of all LGBTQ people. Reverend Parker co-authored this book, A House for Hope, along with the Reverend John Bruins, where together they envisioned our UU faith as elements needed for a strong house. In the chapter titled Life Together, they envision the walls of this theological house as community. Parker writes in this chapter that there is no life apart from life together. Life is relational through and through, she says. The question is not whether we are social, connected beings. The question is how we shape our mode of being with one another and with the source that uphold and sustain life. This is a particularly poignant question given a time such as this. We have seen how those in power have used their social connections to perpetrate lies, to oppress, to harm, and to divide people. It is not recognizing that we are connected to one another. It is also how we leverage those connections that matter. Parker then asks, how can people move beyond isolation, individualism, and a lack of purpose? And one way, she says, is by coming together with others in communities that fire our intellects, touch our hearts, connect us in loving support with others, turn us to face the world's painful realities with honesty and critical analysis, and to direct us into deeds of service and social activism. Parker writes that through assembling, coming together, people can harness what our Unitarian forebearer James Luther Adams called the organization of power and the power of organization. Each of us holds power and influence in some way. It is when we harness that power and influence together that when we recognize that we can do more collectively than we could ever do alone, and that our futures are inexplicably woven together, then we can work for change in ways that is both impactful and sustainable. Parker concludes this chapter with these words: "This is how churches, synagogues, sengas, and mosques make a home for hope. They enable us to create a good life together, a community of resistance, a covenant of joyful interdependence that will support us through the radical changes needed in U.S. society as we embrace the calling of living peacefully and sustainably on this earth." At its heart, movement ecology upholds this same interdependence that Parker writes about. Movement ecology as a way of understanding social change borrows its core logic from systems thinking and the study of living ecosystems. Instead of asking who led this, it asks what relationships, connections, and interactions made this possible. It sees movements less like machines and more like forests or coral reefs, dynamic, interdependent systems that grow and adapt based on their parts, how their parts relate to each other. Nestled within this idea of movement ecology is the work of Deepa Iyer. Deepa Iyer is a South Asian American writer, strategist, and lawyer. Her work is rooted in Asian American, South Asian, Muslim, and Arab communities where she spent 15 years in policy advocacy and coalition building in the wake of the September 11th attacks and ensuing backlash. Her book, Social Change Now, A Guide for Reflection and Connection, was selected as the Unitarian Universalist Association's common read for this year. And much of what I will share with you in these next moments comes from this book. If this topic piques your interest, I invite you to, if you haven't already, to check out this book. It is full of wisdom, but it also, within its pages, are many spaces for you to pause and reflect on how these ideas apply to you and your life. Iyer writes, being a part of a social change effort is one of the most important ways we connect with each other at a time when society insists upon compartmentalizing us into silos of identity, thought, political alignment, and geography. When we engage in social change, we resist these silos and choose connection and solidarity. She envisions these connections as an ecosystem. If we think about ecosystems within the natural world, such as a forest or a coral reef, we know that there are many different organisms that exist in that ecosystem. In a forest, for example, there are trees, moss, fungi, birds, animals, and insects and worms, just to name a few, that exist there. Each organism is vastly different. Each has different needs, each thrives in different ways, and each offers something different that the ecosystem needs in order to sustain itself and flourish. When thinking about ecosystems within a social change framework, Iyer writes, an ecosystem is a community, a home, or a place and space where we feel a sense of belonging, familiarity, and alignment around values, goals, and struggles for the future, and where we emphasize the importance of cultivating, nurturing, and sustaining relationships, connections, and solidarity. She continues writing, when we come together to do social change work in ecosystems, we are accountable to others. We seek consent and permission as needed for our actions, and we receive and offer collaboration and care. Iyer identifies a few characteristics often found in thriving ecosystems. These characteristics include interdependence, the idea that success indirectly and directly is related to each other. A shared energy source, values and goals that fuel action. Reciprocity, actively engaging resources and information, no hoarding, no gatekeeping, accountable to those in our ecosystem. Adaptation to change, flexible, dynamic, and pivoting to meet the changes, conditions, and crises. Diversity, inviting and experimenting with different strategies, narratives, ideas, and including those that even make us uncomfortable. Preservation, tending to relationships, preserving what future generations may require in terms of stories, values, and histories so that they may continue this work. Complexity, being comfortable with nuance and complexity, not boxing ourselves in through binary-based thinking, expecting that conflict and discerning generative ways to repair it. And lastly, the capacity to evolve, welcoming transformation, believing that people, institutions, and systems can and do change. Iyer reminds us that not all of these characteristics will be present at all times. And she writes that, for example, during a crisis, ecosystems may prioritize some conditions over others. At the center of the social change framework are values. Iyer writes, the values circle that appears in the middle of the framework is to indicate how our principles and beliefs are the backbone and foundation for setting goals, clarifying external messages, and taking next steps. When we are able to connect with our values during times of confusion and overwhelm, we can use them to guide our responses. This idea of centering our values is something that we as UUs aspire to practice. We often pass our decisions both individually and collectively through the lens of our shared values of our faith, asking the questions, does this help me live into our core values? And if not, is there another way, or a way that at least brings us closer? One of the most inspiring and liberating aspects of Iyer's social change framework are roles that she identifies. She writes, as individuals and organizations, we show up in certain roles when we engage in social change. Each of us has innate gifts, lived experiences, learned skills, and formal and informal knowledge that we can bring to ecosystems in order to propel social change. Many times I have heard people say things like, I'm not an activist, I don't like protests, or I don't know how to be involved because I can't go to the march. With this framework, IRE recognizes that there are many roles that are required for social change to occur. While protesting is so important, it is one way that we engage in social change. There are also other ways that we make an impact. IRE identifies 10 key roles that individuals and organizations play within ecosystems of social change. I'll briefly share a little bit about these roles, but IRE goes much more in depth about each of the roles in her book, and also includes descriptions, examples, skills and strengths, and ways to grow and strengthen that role. She also includes how others within an ecosystem can support that role. Remember that in an ecosystem, nothing happens in isolation, and discerning how we support one another is a key to a flourishing system. In the book, IRE also provides a checklist that you can use to determine if this goal feels right for you, or if this role feels right for you, and if you are called to engage in it. The first of the roles outlined by IRE are the weavers. These are the people who see the through lines of connectivity between people, places, organizations, ideas, and movements. There are experimenters, those who pioneer and invent. They're risk takers, and they course correct as needed. Frontline responders, those who address community crises by marshaling and organizing resources, networks, and messages. Visionaries, we imagine and generate the boldest possibilities, hopes and dreams, and remind the ecosystem of our direction. Builders develop and organize and implement ideas, practices, people, and resources in service of a collective vision. And caregivers, yes, caregivers, who nurture and nourish the people around them by creating and sustaining a community of care, joy, and connection. There are healers, those who recognize and tend to the generational and current traumas caused by oppressive systems, institutions, policies, and practices. Disruptors take uncomfortable and risky actions to shake up the status quo, to raise awareness, and to build power. And storytellers, who craft and share our community stories, cultures, experiences, histories, and they do this possibly through art, music, media, and movement. And lastly are the guides, those who teach, counsel, and advise, using their gifts of well-earned discernment and wisdom. A healthy movement needs all of these, even if they are not equally visible. Each role is important within the ecosystem. We cannot, nor should we try, to fill all of these roles at once. In an ecosystem, we trust that while we fill our role, others are filling their roles, and together we move forward. Ayer also suggests that these roles can help us to become more aware of our own ego and privilege. She writes, when we display curiosity and use reflection practices to better understand our own motivations and patterns about how we show up for justice, we can make necessary changes and be better service to others and our ecosystem. She says that balancing ego and ecosystem is a journey that every single one of us is on, regardless of the roles that we play. She continues that exploring one's privilege vis-a-vis the roles that we play can help us to understand if we are taking up too much space or if we are playing a gatekeeping role for the ecosystem. Cultivating this form of awareness enables us to inquire whether playing a particular role is making it tough for others to step in, and what might happen if we switched to other roles and created space for others. This reminds me of the racial justice training that I have participated in, and those of us who identify as white were encouraged to closely examine how we show up in racial justice spaces. We were challenged to seek first what the movement called for instead of plowing forward, asking ourselves, how in this moment can I use my unearned privilege to support the work of marginalized people? Do I move back and let my presence be enough? Do I use my voice to amplify the voices of the marginalized? Or do I need to lead in this moment? Always taking care to take our cues from those who are indeed the marginalized and oppressed. Our roles in social change ecosystems can shift and change based on the needs of the movement or on our own energy and needs. I was recently in a group where one of our members of our Democracy Action Team was sharing about a community planning that they had been at. And there was a discussion around what churches and congregations should do in this effort. The question was asked, how are churches and congregations uniquely positioned to support this work? What skills and strengths do they offer? What role can they play? These are the kinds of questions that help us to discern the best roles for our organizations and for ourselves to take in that moment. And the role may be different in one moment or context than it is in another. In January, one of my many clergy members from around the country went to Minneapolis to be in solidarity with people as ICE raids continued in the wake of arrests and deaths, those that were made known to the world and those that went unnamed. And a colleague of mine said that he wanted to be there. With every part of his heart, he wanted to be there, but that he knew it was not safe for him. My friend is here in this country legally, but he is from Africa. And he recognized that in this moment, being on the front lines was too dangerous for him. He could not play this role in this moment, but he trusted that others would. Shifting roles can help us to sustain our efforts and our energies. I am acutely aware that this moment we are in is much more than a moment, and perhaps it always has been. But some days feel like a barrage of injustices that are being perpetrated, and even in the quieter moments, I find myself holding my breath, waiting for what is coming next. Iyer offers some suggestions on how you can create a sustainability plan, and I encourage you to look into that section of the text. But considering our roles can also be a way of caring for ourselves in our ecosystems. I've been a choral singer since my youth, and one of the important things that you learn when singing in a choir is when to breathe. It is important to stagger your breathing with those around you so that each of you is breathing at different times and yet the notes continue to flow. This is true of social change work as well. When we are tired, when we are depleted, we can take a step back from one role and perhaps engage in another way, knowing that others will step in and carry the work forward. I'll close today with one more quote from Deepa Iyer. Our belief in the promise of social change through connection with one another is why we keep trying after feeling disappointed, why we keep returning after grieving, why we keep fighting after resting. It is why we keep building after systems fail, why we keep loving even when we're experiencing heartbreak. It is why we take actions that embody solidarity, resistance, and hope. It's why we infuse our efforts with joy, passion, affirmation, and healing. We intuitively know that something better is blooming, growing, emerging, and we want to be a part of that momentum, that stream, that journey. Please rise, embody your spirit, and join in singing hymn number 1028, The Fire of Commitment.